We're going to be in it tonight and then also next week, just looking at a few of the I am statements. In the book of John, there's 7 of them. We're looking at 3 of them. And last week we talked about this really weird moment where Jesus tells all of these strangers who have come and they've seen him do miracles, and he tells them that he is the bread of life, which is a really weird way to describe yourself. But as we talked through last week, we said that Jesus was pointing to this idea that he can satisfy us in ways that everything else around us cannot satisfy us. And so when we were looking through that, we're now coming into this week where what Jesus kind of regularly does, there's just one, it says it's in teaching slides, and it just says, who is Jesus, man?
Oh, okay.
I'll help you out, so it's not regularly shutting down behind me. Hey, Narnia's this weekend. You guys should check it out. It's the reason why we have, no technology tonight. So, hopefully, real good. But, within that, so we're looking tonight, and Jesus has this moment where what he regularly does is he says, I am, and then makes this really interesting statement that causes us to think and go, okay, what does this say about who Jesus is? What does this say about the character of God? Because as you are in your high school or you're at home or you're in your part-time job or in your club or whatever it is, in that, everyone around you, whether Christian or not, has some sort of idea or belief about who Jesus is. Whether that's good or whether that's bad, they have an idea about who Jesus is, what he did, who he says that he is, how important he is or how not important he is. And so we're looking at some of the things that Jesus says about himself to begin to figure out, who is he? Who really is he? And if you've ever been an athlete, or you've ever participated in anything that has crowd interaction, there's something that you've learned over time as you've played an instrument, or you've been in a sport or something like that. And it's this moment right here. And I experienced this moment, and I appreciate all of you for lying to me when I do this, right? But it's this moment when, your great-grandma comes to your game. She traveled from across Texas, which is traveling from across the world. And she came to see you play, and she screamed as loud as her elderly body would allow her. And she sees you after that game, and she goes, I was screaming for you the whole time. Did you hear me? And right up here, your first answer is, no, Grandma. There were 1,000 of you, right? You're like, no, I did not hear you. But you look her in the eye and you go, yes, oh my gosh, thank you for coming. So glad you got to be here, right? And people come up to you and they yell at you all game, maybe your parents, and they'll come up to you, maybe you had a bad game. And they'll go, didn't you hear me yelling at this point in the game? I told you what to do. And you're like, no, Mom and Dad, sit down in the stands, right? You had this moment where people in the stands are yelling things with this idea that they think that you can hear them, me included. I have a lot of things to say from where I sit, and I sit at the top. When we think that you can hear us, and in reality, if you're a good athlete or you've been doing anything for any amount of time, you can't hear a thing. You've learned to drown out all of the excess noise, all of the extra noise. I know this because when I was running track or cross country, here's literally what happens at the state cross country meet every year. See, in basketball, you guys are lucky because you got this thing called stands. People pay, they go and they sit in them, and there's a barrier. No one is standing on the edge of the court leaning in while you're dribbling with your left hand hey, shoot the three, hey, shoot the three. But in sports like running, where there's no stands, there's no nothing, you have people leaning over into where you're running, looking you through into your soul, and they're like, run faster, and you're like, who are you, the devil? It's crazy experience. But even then, all these people will try and say these things, and you'll finish this entire race, and you'll be like, and your mommy and daddy will come up to you, and they'll be like, and we were here, and we were here, and we ran all over this course to see you and to yell things, and you're like, that's sweet. I didn't even know. But I got no clue. Because you learn to drown out stuff that largely doesn't matter. Right? A good athlete, a good person, they understand that there are very few voices that they let in the moment of competition. Right? One of those, hopefully, is your coach. Right? Because if you're playing a sport that coach is going to call plays from the sidelines or they've got to make adjustments in game in that moment, you've got to always be listening. What do they have for me? What are they going to tell me to do? What are they going to say? What are they coaching me up? And so you've learned that all the other nonsense doesn't matter. You're listening to that one person who is making decisions on the sideline for you and for you to do. Sometimes there may be one or two other voices that you let in. Maybe they're not necessarily voices that are telling you what to do, but they're just really encouraging voices, right? You got one of those moms. They're like, you could lose by 50 points, and they're like, baby girl, you played hard. You played so hard. And you're like, thanks, Mom. And you're like a 16-year-old boy, and you're like, I don't know why you call me baby girl, but that's cool, Mom. Right? Like, you got that weird moment, but you're letting the coach in, and you're letting them in because they're pumping you up. They're motivating you. The things that they're saying are what are keeping you going. The way you're finding your energy. But you've learned, largely, to drown out all the other mess and to only listen to one, maybe two very key voices. And we talk about that because as we talk about who Jesus is, last week we said, man, Jesus, if we really follow him, if we're not looking for just the things that Jesus can give us, but if we're looking for Jesus, the Son of God, if we want to follow him and we want all of him, then he will begin to satisfy us. And for us, if we've ever chosen to follow Jesus, if we've given our life to him, if we would say, hey, we are a Christian, one of the early things that happens is that within you kind of have this passion to say, hey, I want to hear from the Lord. Like, I want to hear from God. I want to begin to do the things that he's telling me to do or to go to the places that he's calling me. Right? Like I always say, high schoolers, you guys are starting to listen to God like more than ever because as you're approaching your senior year, you haven't listened to God like all of high school. But you get into senior year and you're like, I really hope he tells me what college to go to. I hope he speaks up because I need to know now. Or I hope he tells me that I'm even going to at least get to go to college. That would be nice, God, soon. Right? You begin to listen to, I remember my senior year, I'm like, I don't think I've ever asked for anything else, God. Just let me get into school, right? Like you're like, I hope the voice of God comes up. Maybe you've got a few options on the table and you're like, if I go to the wrong university, my whole life will be over. Spoiler alert, it won't be over. You'll be fine. They're pretty much all the same. But you'll go and you'll go, man, God, like speaking in my life, show me this thing. And as we're learning to follow Jesus, we go, man, I want to hear from him. I want to hear from God. I want to know who he is. I want him to speak into my life. And tonight, the relationship that God begins to show us, the relationship that he gives us is a very interesting one because it talks about what it means to hear from him, what it means to listen to him. Because we have a struggle. So if we're a Christian, we say, man, we really want to hear from God, but we struggle. We go, I don't know if this voice is from God. I don't know if this voice isn't from God. I don't even know how to decide that thing. What are the things that God speaks into? And then some of us who aren't Christians, we're trying to figure out, why in the world would I listen to God? Like, who cares? Why is he trustworthy? Because for you and I to listen to somebody else, right? I had like the stupidest of stupid friends in high school. And they were always wanting to do really, really stupid things. And so it was like, go blow up fireworkers here. And some fireworkers, that's not a thing. We were so rebels, we just built them from the ground up. No, but we were like, oh, let's go do this thing. And everything was always at like 1 a.m. Let's go do that. And so we'd go do this stuff. And what happened is all my friends, they would be like, hey, we're going to go do this. We're gonna do this. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like bad. Like, that sounds like not a good idea. And eventually, our friends whose parents caught on would just, basically, their kids would be in, a permanent state of grounded. They'd be like, you're grounded after 10 o'clock every night till 8 o'clock the next morning. So anything you want to do between then, you can't go be like, hey, man, you want to go? He's like, nah, man, I'm grounded. We're like, you've been grounded your entire junior year. He's like, I know, it's crazy. It's a weird world. Right? But to figure out in those moments what's happening with us even as friends, we're going, hey, how can I trust this person who wants me to go do this thing? Time and time again, it shows me that they are trustworthy or that they're not trustworthy. We're trying to figure out, are they a good friend? Are they good? Do they have what's best for me before I go do the thing that they want me to do, before I listen to their voice, before I let it be an influential voice in my life? Right? Not just a voice in my life, but an influential voice in my life, meaning that what they say changes what I do. It changes what I think. It changes what I believe. And so we're even trying to figure that out with God. That one, there are some of us that go, we really want to hear the voice of God, but we don't maybe know how. And then for some of us, we go, man, why would I even want to hear the voice of God? How can I trust that he has something good for me? And John 10 really answers both of those for us. And Jesus talks about a relationship that you and I, unless we're in FFA and we're in a really specific group of FFA, really understand. And Jesus talks about this relationship between a shepherd and a sheep. And I say that I don't understand anything about sheep. Anything I'm going to tell you about shepherds and sheep tonight, that's not prior knowledge that I just have. I'm I was shepherding my own flock one day in high school, and they've taught me all these things, right? It's something that I've learned third party, and largely you probably don't know a lot. We barely know anything about the dogs that live in our house. We're still trying to get inside their heads. We definitely don't know about sheep. But Jesus begins to tell us about this relationship between a shepherd and a sheep, and it's how he describes who he is. And so in John 10, verse 1, this is what Jesus says. He says, "Truly, I tell you, anyone who doesn't enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. And the one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens it for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he has brought all his own outside, he goes ahead of them. And the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And they will never follow a stranger. Instead, they will run away from him because they don't know the voice of strangers." Jesus gave them this figure of speech, but they did not understand what he was telling them. Mostly because, hey, Jesus, that's a really weird way to describe yourself. Like, that's okay. Like, it's okay to walk into Scripture and to go, Jesus just gave us 6 lines on a sheep and a shepherd, and we're just supposed to know what to do with it, right? But we walk into this moment in Scripture, and Jesus tells us this. Here's some, back knowledge that we need. In the Middle East, a sheep and a shepherd, here's what can happen. All of us, we could walk up to a fence, and in this field are all the sheep, and with us is the shepherd. And here's what the shepherd would do. The shepherd would go, hey, if you just say these words, you go to the fence, you call them out, they'll come to you. Which makes sense, right? If you come into my house and you meet my dog, Kaiser, and I'm going to be like, hey, if you just, say these things, Kaiser's going to run up to you. Spoiler alert, you don't have to say Kaiser's name. You just have the voice of a human, and he's like, what? I'll go there. He's a terrible guard dog. We get all, we get broken in and almost die, and he'd be like, it was a fun time. Whoever you all played, it was great. He's the worst dog ever, but we love him. But that's what would happen. If I walked into your house, you had a pet or something like that, we'd walk in and go, oh, hey, what's your dog's name? Oh my God, it's so adorable, sit. And he would follow all these commands from a stranger that he's never met before. Sheep, not so. We would all walk up to that fence, and the shepherd would go, hey, yeah, just say these words, and he'll come. And we'd stand at the fence, and we'd be like, like some other language that I don't speak. We'd be like, hey, sheep, come here. And the sheep would all just keep eating grass. We'd be like, some rude sheep, man. That's like some mean girl sheep. Hey, sheep, get over here. No sheep would come. Real rebellious guy would come up. He'd be like, hey, sheep. He'd get angry, start yelling swear words. Sheep! Nothing. Nobody would come. The shepherd would come up to the fence, and he would come up, and he would just be like, again, in other languages and more sophisticated things, but he'd just be like, hey, sheep. Just floods of sheep, like an avalanche of white fuzziness would come towards him. I'm not kidding. You can go to YouTube. You can look at these videos of sheep in the Middle East and things like that. I don't want to play them tonight because the quality is super terrible and you can't understand what they're saying. But literally sheep from out of the picture. You're like, that sheep just came from 10 miles away and just that's my dude, and just runs. And they all come, and he just sits at the fence. He's not even yelling. He's not strumming. He's not like an air horn calling for him. He's just sitting there and just like, come on, guys. Let's go. I love you. And he just sits there. And for minutes until they all come. You're like, there were 17 sheep when we started. Now there's 1,700 sheep. This guy is doing a miracle right in front of us. It's crazy. They all come running. And so Jesus gives us this illustration that he says, hey, sheep, they know their shepherd's voice. Anybody else can walk up into the field, and it's not even that they just ignore him, they run. They're like, that's not our guy. That's not our guy. Leave. He's a bad dude. But the shepherd of her sheep will walk up, say very little, and they come running because they know his voice. They know his voice, right? When we talk about this illustration of competition, one of my best friends that I grew up, we ran a ton of races together, a ton of races. His dad, from the time that we were real little, when we would run cross country, he would go into the middle of this park, wherever the course was, because they're just like, we're going to drop some 13-year-olds off and let them run laps around the park and call it a sport. Crazy. And he would literally, he wouldn't go to different points to yell at us. He would go to the very middle, and he would just stand there and yell, come on, let's go. Come on, let's go. Come on, let's go. Not as near as loud as the people 10 feet from us. And for 3 miles, we would just run next to each other like, I hate your dad. I hate your dad. I hear him for the entire time that we're out here. I cannot get his voice out of my head. It's the only thing. I hear your dad before I hear my own father because he's been yelling the same thing for 7 years every weekend of my life. We just understood his voice. We just heard a little bit of it, and we're like, there's Charlie again. I wish he would get sick one Saturday. That'd be great. We just heard it, man. We just knew it, internally. Even now, as a grown man, when I go back to my hometown, I can be on one end of the grocery store and hear his voice not talking to me and go, Cameron's dad is here. Run. I feel it. I know that it's there. I can hear it all these times. I know his voice before any other voice. And so we say, man, if we say we're the sheep, man, we're believers, and we say, man, God is a shepherd, then the sheep know his voice. We're going to get in a little bit why the sheep know his voice, because for some of us, maybe we read this passage like me and we go, what? I think I'm a sheep, but I don't feel confident in the voice of God. So does that mean that I'm not one of God's? Does that mean that I'm not a part of this inner circle as he talks about the sheep? We're going to come back to that in a little bit. But for those of us that we go, man, why can we trust the shepherd? If we skip forward to verse 11, it says this, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, since he is not the shepherd and doesn't own the sheep, leaves them and runs away when he sees a wolf coming. The wolf then snatches and scatters them. This happens because he is a hired hand and doesn't care about the sheep. But I'm the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me. And just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus says, you can trust my voice because I lay down my life for you. This is this idea that the sheep would be kept in this pen at night, and the gate, the shepherd would lay at the gate so that nothing came in or out without literally going over him, right? And for you, you're like, anybody can sneak past this. And let me tell you, that just is not true. As someone who's an adult who works with teenagers, one of the things that we do when we go to youth camp, when we go to Camp Collide this year, one of the things that me and Tyler will begin to do is we'll have a conversation. Which adult do we put in front of the door if we need to? And it's this idea that if one of my favorite teenagers that I love gets a little bit out of hand and gets a little bit rowdy, you get crazy ideas in your head and you're like, we're going to do terrible things at night. We go, which adult sleeps in front of the door? Because ain't nobody getting over that adult out of that cabin, right? Like we begin to think, who's going to be the one that protects everybody else in there and also protects you from yourself should you get out? And it's like this idea that the shepherd literally sleeps in front of the gate. Nothing comes in, that even if a wolf shows up to eat the sheep, like that's what he's doing. He's not playing tag. He like scatters them. Oh, they all flee and they run. No, he comes in, he kills them, and he eats them. The shepherd stays and lays in front of the gate even when the wolf shows up. And let me tell you, I'm running if the wolf shows up. Like I'm bailing. I am out of there. But Jesus says, here's the deal. When people mean to do you harm, I've put down my life for you. I fight for you. I defend you. I defend my people. I am the God of my people. I know you and you know me. And so we go, man, is there anybody more trustworthy than the one who would lay down their life for us? The one who would die for us, the one who loves us to that degree that when danger shows up, he is there. He may not fight danger in the way that we think he should. There may be effects of it on our lives, but in the end, he is there and he is fighting. So we can trust him. And this is, how do we know for those of us that we go, okay, but I think I'm a sheep, but I still struggle hearing the voice of God. Do you have any idea how much time a sheep and a shepherd spend together? Like all of it. For those of us, here's what happens, and here's what I know, because I do the exact same thing when I go, man, I'm really struggling hearing the voice of God. It's because I haven't spent any recent time with God. And some of us, we think, man, we're going to wake up tomorrow morning, and all of a sudden, down from the clouds, it's going to be God, and he's going to be like, hello? I have a word. And you're going to be like, oh my God, I've waited 14 years for this. No. That's not how God speaks. That's not what God does. We learn to hear the voice of God by spending regular and consistent time with him. We spend time in his word, not because some of us, what we think is in the Bible is we think it's like rules and regulations and all stuff. No, it's not. It's an entire collection of books and poems and narratives and songs that teach us about the character of God, because when we can learn about the character of somebody, we can understand what they would say, how they would say it, and hear their voice. Have you ever heard someone, you hear a rumor about someone, and they go, oh, so-and-so said this thing. And you hear it, and you go, that can't be true. That they would never say that. And it's this inkling inside of you that you know that person so well that you go, man, they would never say that. That's not part of their character. I mean, the Bible shows us who the character of God is so we can begin to decipher what is he saying and what is he not. When we spend time in prayer with him and we pour out our hearts and we ask him to speak to us, that we get in the practice of listening, not that every time that he just speaks so audibly into our soul that it changes us, but that we are in the practice of saying, hey, when I read scripture, God is speaking to me, and I'm learning that there's something for me to change when I walk into scripture. And we sit there and we spend regular time with him, that he would call us to new things, that we would learn his voice. Earlier when I talked about knowing my friend's dad's voice, what did I say? Every Saturday for 7 years. Every Saturday for 7 years. That's a lot of time with one person hearing the same thing, to be able to hear it over and over and over again. The same is true for you and that coach that you listen to. The reason you can drown everybody else out is because the coach is spending every single morning with you, sometimes like the first voice that you hear in the morning, yelling at you, driving you through drills. I mean, you have that voice ingrained into your head. I mean, if we want to hear from God, we don't just get on our knees and ask him something and then he doesn't show up and we go, I guess he's not speaking. No, we have to spend regular time with him to even be able to hear and understand his voice. We have to know him. And the reason that the sheep know the shepherd different from everybody else that walks up to the fence and goes, hey sheep, come here, is because they've never spent any time with anybody else on that fence line. Only with the shepherd. One of the major reasons that I think that we struggle with hearing the voice of God, I believe, is because we don't spend enough time with him. And here's why we struggle with spending enough time with God. One is because we've been sold a terrible version of him. We've been sold a moment of him that we ride these highs and lows of, oh man, God is this and I'm worshiping here, but then in all these moments that I don't feel like some crazy burning sensation in my heart, then God's not showing up because that's the only time that God shows up. That's just not true. We just don't see that in scripture. That's not real. But the other thing is this, is that the reason we don't spend regular time with God is because we have a terrible view of himself, of him, and of ourselves. That we look at ourselves and we struggle meeting with God because we see our own sin, we see all the things that are keeping us from him. We say that there's no way that this God could ever love me, that he could ever understand me, that he could ever see what I'm going through, could never forgive me. God could never do any of these things, and so we refuse to spend time with him. And the more that we don't spend time with him, the less that we hear his voice and the less that we recognize it. Tonight, as you're in small groups, man, you're going to talk about what does it look like to spend time with God. How often have you been spending time with God? What does your time with God look like now? Maybe in a small group, you decide, hey, we're going to hold ourselves accountable to some of this. We're going to study a book. We're going to study John. We're going to study the I am statements together. We're going to do this thing, keep each other accountable for what our time with God looks like, because maybe, just maybe, your small group wants to hear from God. Maybe you want to hear from God. You're going to talk about what are some of the things that you want to hear from him. How are you struggling? What are you praying for that you feel like he's not showing up in? How can your group be praying for it? You're going to be thinking about these things because here's the deal. If scripture tells us in John 10 that my sheep know my voice, then we better spend a lot of time with the shepherd so we know it. There's nothing more terrifying than not knowing the good shepherd, the one who lays down his life for us.